everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So in today's video, we are going to discuss Israel and Palestine conflict. So let's get started with today's video. Before moving forward, let's discuss background of Israel-Palestine conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict dates back to the end of the 19th century. In 1947, the United Nations adopted Resolution 181, known as the Partition Plan, which sought to divide the British Mandate of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states. For more information, you can refer to this map. On May 14, 1948, the State of Israel was created, sparking the First Arab-Israeli War. The war ended in 1949 with Israel's victory, but 750,000 Palestinians were displaced and the territory was divided into three parts: the State of Israel, the West Bank of the Jordan River, and the Gaza Strip. Over the following years, tensions rose in the region, particularly between Israel and Egypt, Jordan and Syria. Following the 1956 Suez Crisis and Israel's invasion of the Sinai Peninsula, Egypt, Jordan and Syria signed mutual defense pacts in anticipation of a possible mobilization of Israeli troops. In June 1967, following a series of maneuvers by Egyptian President Abdel Gamal Nasser, Israel preemptively attacked Egyptian and Syrian air forces, starting the Six-Day War. After the war, Israel gained territorial control over the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. 6 years later, in what is referred to as the Yom Kippur War or the October War, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise two-front attack on Israel to regain their lost territory. The conflict did not result in significant gains for Egypt, Israel, or Syria, but Egyptian President Anwar al-Sadat declared the war a victory for Egypt as it allowed Egypt and Syria to negotiate over previously ceded territory. Finally, in 1979, following a series of ceasefires and peace negotiations, representatives from Egypt and Israel signed the Camp David Accords, a peace treaty that ended the 30-year conflict between Israel and Egypt. Even though the Camp David Accords improved relations between Israel and their neighbors, the question of Palestinian self-determination and self-governance remained unresolved. In the year 1987, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians lived in the West Bank and Gaza Strip rose up against the Israeli government in what is known as the First Intifada. The 1993 Oslo I Accords mediated the conflict, setting up a framework for the Palestinians to govern themselves in the West Bank and Gaza, and enabled mutual recognition between the newly established Palestinian Authority and Israel's government. In the year 1995, the Oslo II Accords expanded on the first agreement, adding provision that mandated the complete withdrawal of Israel from 6 cities and 450 towns in the West Bank. In 2000, sparked in part by Palestinian grievances over Israel's control over the West Bank, a stagnating peace process, and former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon visit to the Alaska Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam, in September 2000. Palestinians launched the Second Intifada, which would last until 2005. In response, the Israeli government approved construction of a barrier wall around the West Bank in 2002, despite opposition from the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. In 2013, the United States attempted to revive the peace process between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. However, peace talks were disrupted when Fatah, the Palestinian Authority's ruling party, formed a unity government with its rival faction Hamas in 2014. Hamas, a spin off Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, founded in 1987 following the First Intifada, is one of two major Palestinian political parties and was designated a foreign terrorist organization by the United States in 1997. In the summer of 2014, clashes in the Palestinian territories precipitated a military confrontation between the Israeli military and Hamas, in which Hamas fired nearly 3,000 rockets at Israel, and Israel retaliated with a major offensive in Gaza. The skirmish ended in late August 2014 with a ceasefire deal brokered by Egypt, but only after 73 Israelis and 2,251 Palestinians were killed. After a wave of violence between Israelis and Palestinians in 2015, Palestinian President Mohammed Abbas announced that Palestinians would no longer be bound by the territorial divisions created by the Oslo Accord. In March and May of 2018, Palestinians in the Gaza Strip conducted weekly demonstrations at the border between the Gaza Strip and Israel. Also in May of 2018, fighting broke out between Hamas and the Israeli military in what became the worst period of violence since 2014. Before reaching a ceasefire, militants in Gaza fired over 100 rockets into Israel. Israel responded with strikes on more than 50 targets in Gaza during the 24-hour flare-up. In 2018, the Trump administration cancelled funding for the UN Relief and Work Agency, which provides aid to Palestinian refugees, and relocated the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a reversal of a long-standing US policy. Israel considers the complete and united Jerusalem its capital, while Palestinians claim East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state. In January 2020, the Trump administration released its long-awaited Peace to Prosperity plan, which was rejected by Palestinians due to its support for future Israeli annexation of settlements in the West Bank and control over an undivided Jerusalem. Now coming to the present situation. On May 10, Israeli armed forces stormed Alaska Mosque in the Jerusalem. In this, more than 300 Palestinians were injured in the raid. Then, in retaliation, Hamas, the Islamist militant group that runs Gaza, have fired over 1,000 rockets into Israel so far. This has killed 8 people in Israel till now. In response, then the Israelis, they have launched several airstrikes on Gaza, killing over 130 Palestinians, including 9 children so far. Thank you. If you really like the video, then please share, comment and do subscribe my channel for regular updates.